right, welcome in everyone, kicking off another deep dive here.
Uh-huh.
And today we're looking at the 2024 Yamaha XTZ 125.
Okay.
You sent over a really cool review about this bike, and it looks like a really interesting trail bike.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the information that you gave us, and
Okay.
we're going to break it down and really analyze it
Fair.
for everyone out there.
Yeah.
You know, we got the specs, we got the competitor comparisons, and we've got a really good feel for the design and, you know, rider comfort, all that stuff.
All the important stuff.
All the important stuff, exactly.
Yep.
So by the end of this, you should have a really clear picture of whether or not
Uh-huh.
this bike, the XTZ 125, is something you
Sure.
might be interested in.
That's the goal.
So the review right away calls this a tough and reliable trail bike for all riders.
Okay.
But it really seems to highlight the adventure seekers and those who love to hit the trails.
Right.
So what was your first impression when you saw that?
Well, the first thing that struck me was that phrase, for all riders,
Mm.
because, you know, it emphasizes the lightweight design, the 125cc engine, and that really good handling that this bike is known for.
Hmm.
So,
Okay.
you know, what that tells me is that this could be a good bike for somebody who's just getting into trail riding,
Right.
but also maybe somebody who's a little bit more experienced, who might need something that's a little bit more nimble and agile.
Right. So it's kind of like that Goldilocks bike, right? It's
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
not too big, not too small. It's just, right?
It's trying to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so let's look at the specs.
Okay.
We've got the engine. It's air-cooled, 4-stroke, SOHC 124.9cc engine.
Okay.
So what are the key things that somebody needs to know about this engine, you know, for someone who might be considering this bike?
Well, I think the air-cooled four-stroke design, I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty common, and it's known for being pretty robust
Okay.
and generally pretty easy to maintain. Right.
So that's a good thing, especially for a trail bike.
Right.
That might see some pretty rough terrain.
Makes sense.
The 124.9cc displacement,
Yeah.
it produces about 10 horsepower and
Yeah.
9 newton meters of torque.
Okay.
And what that tells me is that this engine is probably prioritizing usable power in that low to mid range, you know, where you really need it
Yeah.
for navigating those trails and
Yeah.
getting over obstacles.
Yeah, not about speed. It's about,
Not really about speed. No, it's about...
getting over things. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
It's a trail bike.
It is the trail bike.
It's not a cruiser.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now we've got,
Okay.
it says here, carburetor fuel system.
Okay.
So, you know, in today's world, a lot of bikes are using fuel injection. What's the significance of having a carburetor in this bike?
Well, you know, it's interesting
Yeah.
because it's a trade-off between simplicity and performance. A carburetor, this one uses a Mikuni BS29,
Uh-huh.
and it's very simple.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people can understand it.
Yeah.
It's easy to work on.
Especially if you're out on the trail and you need to fix something.
Exactly. But fuel injection,
Yeah.
you know, it offers better fuel efficiency, maybe a little bit smoother response
Okay.
from the throttle.
Okay.
But I think, you know, they went with the simpler option here.
So they're prioritizing reliability over those finer details.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so let's talk about suspension.
Okay.
We've got a telescopic fork, 190 millimeters of travel in the front,
Okay.
and a monoshock with 180 millimeters of travel in the rear.
Okay.
Are those big numbers for a bike in this category?
Those are pretty big numbers.
Okay.
That tells me that, you know, they really designed this suspension
Yeah.
to absorb those impacts and keep the wheels on the ground.
Okay.
You know, 190 millimeters of travel up front is quite a lot for a bike like this. So, you know, that tells me they really wanted to make sure that this thing can handle rough terrain.
More so than smooth roads.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then we've got the braking system.
Okay.
So it's a disc brake in the front and a drum brake in the rear.
Okay.
So is that pretty common for this type of bike?
Yeah, that's a pretty common setup.
Okay.
Disc brake in the front, that's good. It gives you a lot of stopping power.
Right, especially going downhill.
Especially going downhill. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that drum brake in the rear, you know,
Yeah.
it's a simpler design.
Okay.
It's really reliable.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need as much maintenance.
It's not as powerful, though, is it?
No, it's not as powerful.
But it's reliable.
But it's reliable. It's good enough.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so tires.
Right.
We got a 19-inch wheel up front with a 90/90 tire.
Okay.
And an 18-inch rear wheel with a 1280 tire. So, you know, what does that usually tell you about, you know, the focus of a bike like this?
Well, that 19-inch front wheel, that's really common for off-road bikes.
Okay.
And that's because it helps roll over obstacles better.
Like rocks and sticks.
Rocks, sticks, roots, all that stuff. And that narrower front tire, 90/90, that can help with steering on those narrow trails.
So you can be a little bit more precise?
More precise.
Yeah.
And the rear tire is slightly wider.
Okay.
And that gives you more traction, especially on loose surfaces.
All right, so it seems like everything is really pointing towards off-road.
It is. It is. They definitely designed this for the trail.
All right. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got a 12-liter fuel tank.
Okay.
And it gets 35 kilometers per liter.
Okay.
So how far can you go on a tank of gas?
You can go pretty far, potentially over 400 kilometers.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah, that's a big plus if you're planning on...
So you don't really have to worry too much about...
You don't have to worry about running out of fuel.
Finding a gas station.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Okay, now the seat height is 840 millimeters. And ground clearance is 240 millimeters.
Wow.
So those numbers sound...
They sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, depending on how tall you are.
Yeah, that's right.
So, if you're tall, this is great.
Yeah, you get that leg room.
Yeah, but if you're short, you might have some problem.
You might have some problems, yeah, that's right.
You might be tipping over at every stop.
Yeah, you might not be able to flat-foot it.
Okay, but that ground clearance is great.
That ground clearance is fantastic.
Yeah, so you can really get over a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you can go over rocks and logs and all kinds of obstacles.
Awesome.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about bottoming out.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah.
So wet weight, 124 kilograms.
That's light.
That's really light.
That's really light for a motorcycle.
Especially for an off-road bike.
Especially for an off-road bike.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's going to make a big difference in how it handles.
Yeah, so it should feel really nimble. And
super nimble, super agile.
Easy to ride.
Yeah, you should be able to really flick it around on the trails.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the review dives into the key features here.
Okay.
And the first thing it mentions is this lightweight and agile design.
Right.
And, again, we talked about that 124 kilogram weight, making it easy to maneuver.
Right. And it's not just about being able to muscle it around.
Right.
That low weight also makes the bike feel more responsive.
Okay.
When you're riding it. So, you can really flick it around on the trails, change direction quickly.
So the low weight is a huge benefit.
Huge benefit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the 125cc engine, they mentioned that again.
Right.
But here they're focusing on the balance between that 10 horsepower and the 35 kilometers per liter fuel efficiency.
Right. Right.
So it seems like they've hit a sweet spot there.
I think so, yeah.
Where you get enough power, but you're not constantly filling up the tank.
That's the key. It's about balance.
Yeah.
It's about having enough power to do what you need to do, but also being able to ride for a long time.
Okay.
Without having to stop for gas every 5 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, now, robust suspension.
Yeah.
Again, 190 millimeters, 180 millimeters of travel. So how important is this?
Well, it's really important.
Okay.
I mean, the suspension is what allows you to ride comfortably over rough terrain.
Okay.
It soaks up the bumps. It keeps the bike stable.
So you're not getting beat up.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Which is essential.
All right. And then that brake system, front disc, rear drum. What are they saying about that in terms of this bike?
Well, they're saying it's reliable.
Okay.
It gives you good stopping power on all different kinds of surfitas.
Yeah.
Which is really important when you're off-road.
Yeah, you don't know what you're going to encounter.
Exactly. You don't know what you're going to encounter.
So you got to be able to stop.
You got to be able to stop.
Okay.
So it's all about safety.
All right. Now that long-range fuel tank.
Yes.
12 liters.
12 liters.
We talked about that range. Over 400 kilometers.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It is huge.
Especially for off-road.
Yeah. If you're going on a long adventure ride, you don't have to worry about,
filling up
all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then 240 millimeters of ground clearance.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that.
We talked about it. Yeah.
That's a lot of ground clearance.
That's a lot. So they're really emphasizing that this bike can get over anything.
Yeah. You can go over rocks, logs, whatever you encounter on the trail.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's designed for that.
Okay. And the 840 millimeter seat height.
Yes.
Again. Good for taller riders.
Yeah, not so good for shorter riders.
Yeah.
But it's a trade-off. You get that ground clearance.
You get the ground clearance.
And that higher seat height can actually be helpful for off-road riding sometimes.
Okay, so the review compares this bike to a couple of its competitors.
Okay.
The Honda CRF 125F.
Right.
And the Suzuki DRZ 125L.
Okay.
So let's start with the engine and performance.
Okay.
How does the XTZ 125 stack up in that category?
Well, it seems like the XTZ 125 with its 10.3 horsepower,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the middle ground.
Okay.
It got enough power for those longer trails.
Yeah.
But it's not too heavy.
Right.
The Honda CRF 125F has a little less power.
Okay.
9.3 horsepower.
Okay.
So it might feel a little bit more sluggish.
Right.
And then the Suzuki DRZ 125L has the most power.
Okay.
It's got about 11 horsepower.
But it's heavier. Right.
But it's heavier, yeah.
Yeah.
It's trade off.
Okay. All right. So when it comes to suspension and handling, what are we looking at there?
Well, the XTZ 125 has the most suspension travel.
Okay.
190 millimeters up front, 180 in the rear.
Okay.
And that's going to make a big difference.
Okay.
When you're riding on rough terrain.
Yeah.
It's going to be more comfortable.
Okay.
It's going to be more stable.
Okay.
The Suzuki DRZ 125L, it has a more sophisticated suspension.
Okay.
But it's heavier.
Yeah.
So it might not be as nimble.
Okay.
And then the Honda, it has the least amount of suspension travel.
So it's not quite as good.
Yeah, it's not quite as good off-road.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So weight and comfort.
Okay.
XTZ 125 comes in at the lightest.
It does. It does.
124 kilograms.
Yep.
What's the significance of that?
Well, that means it's going to be easier to handle.
Yeah.
Especially for beginners.
Right. Okay.
It's also going to be less tiring to ride.
Cool.
The Honda is actually lighter.
Oh,
on paper, but it's not as nimble.
Okay.
And then the Suzuki's the heaviest.
So again, we're back to that weight.
Back to that weight.
Being a trade-off.
A trade-off.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Price and value.
Okay.
So how does the XTZ 125 stack up there?
Well, it looks like it's a really good value.
Okay.
It's got a good balance of performance, reliability, and features.
Uh-huh.
And it's priced competitively.
Okay.
So the Honda, it's probably the most affordable,
Okay.
but it doesn't have as many features.
Okay.
And the Suzuki, it's more expensive.
Because it's got more features.
Because it's got more features, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So overall, when you compare it to those other bikes, it seems like this bike is a really well-rounded option.
I think so, yeah.
It might not be the best in any one category,
Right.
but it does a lot of things well.
It does a lot of things well. That's right.
Okay, so let's move on to design and comfort.
Okay.
They talk about the ergonomic and rider-friendly design of this bike.
Yeah.
Slim profile, natural handlebar position.
Right.
How important is that especially for longer rides?
That's really important. I mean, if you're going to be spending a lot of time on the bike,
Yeah.
you want to be comfortable.
Right.
You don't want to be cramped up.
Yeah.
So that slim profile, the natural handlebar position,
Yeah.
those are all good things.
Okay.
They all contribute to rider comfort.
And that 840 millimeter seat height,
Uh-huh.
we talked about it. It could be good, it could be bad, depending on how tall you are.
Right. But it does make it accessible
Yeah.
to a wider range of riders.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. They also mentioned the durable and strong build.
Uh-huh.
It's got a robust frame, so
Yeah, that's important.
it can really handle the abuse of being off-road.
Absolutely. I mean, you're going to be going over rough terrain.
Yeah.
You're going to be hitting bumps. You're going to be dropping the bike. So it needs to be able to take it.
All right. And then the suspension system.
Uh-huh.
Again, they mentioned that was big travel numbers.
Those big travel numbers.
That's a big factor in how this bike feels.
Yeah, it really contributes to the overall riding experience.
Yeah.
It keeps the bike stable.
Okay.
Keeps the rider comfortable.
Right.
And that's really important for long rides.
Okay, now the handlebar and the foot peg design. They mentioned that they're designed to reduce vibrations.
Right. And
provide a really secure footing.
So why is that important?
Well, reducing vibrations, that's good for your hands.
Yeah.
Especially on long rides.
Yeah.
It helps prevent fatigue.
Okay.
And
it's just more comfortable overall?
More comfortable overall, yeah.
Okay.
And those foot pegs, they need to be grippy.
Yeah.
Especially when you're standing up.
Right, right.
You need to have a good, secure footing.
Exactly. You don't want to be slipping around.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The lighting and instrumentation.
Okay.
So they say it's simple but functional. It's got your speed, fuel, trip distance.
All right. It's got bright LED lighting.
Okay.
So it sounds like they've got the basics covered.
It got the basics covered.
Without making it overly complicated.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need a lot of fancy gadgets when you're out on the trail.
Especially if they're going to break.
Exactly. All right.
Keep it simple.
All right. Now they talk about the aesthetic appeal.
Okay.
And, they say it's sleek and modern, aggressive lines, bold graphics.
Right.
Gotta look good out there on the trail, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just about performance.
Yeah.
It's also about style.
Yeah.
You want to look good while you're riding.
Exactly. All right, so let's summarize here.
Okay.
What are the main advantages of this bike?
Well, it's got excellent fuel efficiency.
Uh-huh.
It's light and agile.
Uh-huh.
It's got high ground clearance, robust suspension, affordable price. It's user-friendly for beginners, and it's durable.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, it's a lot of good things going for it.
Yeah, a lot of good things. So what are some of the drawbacks?
Well, it doesn't have a lot of power for high-speed riding.
Yeah.
That 125cc engine is really designed for trails.
Yeah.
Not for the open road.
So if you're looking for a speed demon,
this is not the bike for you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Also, it's a small engine.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be super powerful.
No, if you're an experienced rider, you might find it a little bit underwhelming.
Okay, now, basic instrument cluster.
Yeah, it's pretty basic.
So if you're looking for a lot of bells and whistles,
this is not the bike for you.
Yeah. And limited on road capabilities?
Right. Those tires are designed for off-road.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be as good on pavement.
Right. And the suspension isn't really set up.
It's not really set up for the road.
Yeah. Okay. It's not ideal for long-distance touring.
Right. The seat's not that comfortable.
Yeah.
And the fuel tank is kind of small.
Okay. And limited payload capacity.
Yeah. If you're going to be carrying a lot of gear, it is not the bike for you.
All right. So let's go over these FAQs.
Okay.
So what's the best use for this bike?
Off-road riding.
Oh, cool.
Trails.
Okay.
Especially for beginners.
Okay. So is it suitable for beginners?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. What about top speed?
About 100 kilometers an hour.
Okay.
62 miles per hour.
So it's not going to break any speed records?
No.
Okay.
But it's good enough for what it's designed for.
Right. And the fuel efficiency?
35 kilometers per liter.
Okay. So that's really good.
You can go pretty far on a tank of gas.
Yeah, you can go pretty far.
Okay, what about weight capacity?
It's limited. It's best for solo riders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Road riding suitability?
Limited, primarily for off-road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. License requirements?
Check your local regulations.
Okay. Ease of maintenance?
Relatively simple.
Okay.
Yamaha has a good service network?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Comfort for long rides?
Not ideal. The seat is designed for shorter rides. Okay. And what colors does it come in?
Blue, black, and red.
All right. So we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have.
And, this 2024 Yamaha XTZ 125 seems like a really great option.
It does.
For anyone who's looking for a lightweight, agile, fuel-efficient off-road bike.
Yep, especially beginners.
Especially beginners, yeah. So, it's got that great suspension, high ground clearance, affordable price. Really checks all the boxes.
It does.
But there are limitations.
There are.
It's not a speed demon.
Right. It's not a powerhouse.
It doesn't have all the bells and whistles,
It's not a luxury bike.
It's not a luxury bike.
No.
It's a trail bike.
It's a trail bike.
And it's designed for that specific purpose.
That's right.
So, if you're looking for a bike to really go out and explore, off the beaten path, this could be a really great option for you.
It could be, yeah.
All right, so hopefully this deep dive has provided you with a really good understanding of this bike.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's something that you might be interested in.
I hope so.
So here's something to think about.
Oh.
Yamaha focused on balancing off-road capability with user-friendliness in this bike. So what other vehicles, not just motorcycles, could benefit from that same philosophy?
Good question.
Where it's not just about power, it's about
usability
and being easy to use.
Practicality,
that's it. All right, so that's something to think about.
It is.
Until our next deep dive. Happy trails.
Happy trails. Ride safe.
And we'll see you soon.
See you later.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.